Skyler White was actually smarter than Walter White the entire time. Look, I know that sounds completely unhinged to say out loud, but just hear me out for a second. If you go back to when Breaking Bad was actually airing, Skyler was easily the most hated character on television. People absolutely loathed her. There were literal hate forums dedicated to her. People were screaming about how she was ruining Walt's life, calling her a nag, a hypocrite, a villain. We all completely fell for Walt's narrative because he was the protagonist. We wanted to see the chemistry teacher break bad, cook the blue meth, and build this badass criminal empire. Skyler was just the annoying obstacle in the way of our fun. But if you step back from the hype, take off the Heisenberg sunglasses, and actually look at the final scoreboard of the show, the reality is wild. Walt is dead. He died bleeding out all alone on the cold floor of a meth lab, hated by his son, estranged from his wife, leaving a trail of absolute destruction behind him. Jesse Pinkman barely made it out alive, scarred for life after being kept in a literal cage as a meth slave. Hank Schrader, a veteran federal agent, got executed in the dirt and buried in an unmarked shallow grave in the middle of the desert. Gomi is dead. Mike is dead. Gus Fring is blown up. But Skyler? Skyler survived, her kids survived, and financially, when you look at the trust fund setup with Gretchen and Elliot at the very end, her family won. So how does a suburban housewife with zero criminal background navigate a war zone involving the cartel, the neo-Nazis, the DEA, and a sociopathic genius husband, and come out as the only one still standing? It's not luck. It's because she was playing three-dimensional chess while everyone else was playing checkers.
Zero cholesterol and you won't even taste the difference.
Let's actually break down how this happened, starting right from the beginning. Let's go back to Season 1, Episode 2. Walt gets his cancer diagnosis and his ego immediately breaks. He throws a tantrum, refuses financial help from his rich friends, and decides his best option is to start cooking meth with a former burnout student in a broken-down RV. He starts disappearing for hours at a time, coming home late, sweating, coughing, and giving these absolutely terrible, half-baked excuses. He's acting like a completely different human being, and Skyler notices instantly. She doesn't just suspect that something is slightly off, she knows it. Right out the gate, she is checking the phone bills, tracing his steps, tracking down the weird numbers, and confronting him directly. She can read him like a book because she's been married to the guy for 16 years. The second his behavior patterns shift by even a fraction of a percent, she flags it. Now, contrast that with Hank Schrader. This is what completely blows my mind when you rewatch the show. Hank is a literal, highly trained DEA agent. He is actively leading the task force hunting down this new mysterious kingpin named Heisenberg. Hank is sitting at the exact same Sunday barbecue dinner table as Walt every single week. Walt is right there, coughing, looking stressed, suddenly flush with random cash, acting incredibly shady. Walt even goes on a literal ride-along with Hank to a live DEA meth bust in the very first episode, and Hank doesn't suspect his own brother-in-law for 5 entire seasons. It takes Hank accidentally finding a book on a toilet seat in Walt's house to finally put the pieces together. But Skyler caught on to the lies in episode 2. That's not luck, guys. That is pure emotional intelligence. She understands human behavior and micro-expressions better than a trained federal investigator. She is locking onto tone shifts and behavioral anomalies that Hank completely misses, because Hank's ego makes him see Walt as just a pathetic, weak chemistry teacher who could never hurt a fly. Skyler doesn't have that bias. She sees reality clearly.
Hey, it's not gonna bite you, all right? Looks like Keith Richards with a glass of warm milk, doesn't it?
Skyler finally uncovers the truth in Season 3, that her husband isn't a secondhand pot dealer but an actual meth cook. Think about how a normal person reacts. Most people completely spiral. They scream, they panic, they call the police immediately, or they pack up and burn the whole situation down. Skyler doesn't do that. Instead of reacting emotionally, her brain immediately goes into high-level risk management. She runs the numbers in her head and assesses the chessboard. She realizes that if she blows the whistle and calls the feds right then, the entire family is ruined instantly. The federal government will seize the house under asset forfeiture laws. The bank accounts will be frozen. The kids will be left with absolutely nothing. Her son Flynn and her newborn baby Holly will be branded the children of an infamous drug lord for the rest of their lives. And on top of that, the state will investigate her as a co-conspirator. Even if she's completely innocent, her life is effectively over. So what does she do? She plays defense. She protects the kids first, and she does it by manipulating everyone around her without them even realizing they're being played. Think about the famous pool scene in Season 5. Walt is hosting a party, acting like the big, successful family man, and Skyler slowly walks into the pool fully clothed and just sinks to the bottom. When that episode first aired, the entire internet blasted her. Everyone watched that and said, wow, look at Skyler having a total hysterical breakdown, she's so weak, she's losing her mind. But if you look at the mechanics of what she actually achieved, it wasn't hysteria at all. It was a cold, calculated, strategic maneuver. Skyler knew that as long as the kids were in that house, they were in extreme danger from Walt's enemies. But she couldn't just tell Walt to let them leave, because Walt's massive ego wouldn't allow it. so she intentionally manufactured a public crisis. By making herself look completely unstable and mentally broken in front of the whole family, she created a foolproof, unquestionable excuse to get Flynn and Holly out of that house and over to Hank and Marie's safely. She let everyone think she was falling apart, but in reality, she was the only one entirely in control of the room. Walt's intelligence is completely academic. He understands chemistry, formulas, and molecules, but he fundamentally does not understand people. Skyler understands people, and honestly, knowing how to read a room and manipulate human behavior is way more dangerous than knowing how to cook a batch of blue meth. Walt is fantastic at generating revenue, sure. He can make the product, he can kill the competition, and he can watch the cash pile up. But once the money is made, Walt has absolutely zero clue what to do with it. He is literally stuffing duffel bags full of millions of dollars into a dark crawl space under his house like a total amateur. He's handing boxes of cash to Saul Goodman, just hoping Saul will magically wave a magic wand and make it usable. There is no long-term plan, no security, no system. Walt is so hyper-focused on the ego trip of being the boss and making the product that he completely forgets a fundamental rule of crime. If you can't clean the money is completely useless to you. Enter Skyler. In less than a week, she steps in and designs a legitimate corporate infrastructure from scratch. She identifies the perfect front business, the A1A car wash. She negotiates the buying price by manipulating the owner and sets up a flawless double-entry bookkeeping system. She creates the fake revenue streams, builds the paper trail, and figures out exactly how many dollars they can safely clean per day without triggering an alarm at the IRS. Walt couldn't do a single piece of that. He didn't even think about it. Without Skyler cleaning that cash, Walt's empire would have collapsed within 6 months. The IRS would have flagged a suburban chemistry teacher, suddenly buying sports cars and paying for high-end cancer treatments out of pocket, and the whole operation would have been raided before Gus Fring could even invite Walt out for chicken. Skyler literally saved him from a federal prison cell, and Walt's ego was so massive he barely even acknowledged it. And then we have the Ted Benake situation. This is the #1 thing fans use to justify their hatred for Skyler. She gave away Walt's hard-earned money to her boss. But if you actually look at the logistics, it was low-key the smartest defensive move in the entire series. Ted is committing massive tax fraud at his company. Normally, that's Ted's problem, but Skyler is his accountant, and her name is all over those fraudulent books. Skyler realizes something that Walt's ego completely blinded him to. If the IRS audits Ted Benake, they are going to trace the audit directly to Skyler. If they dig into Skyler's personal finances, they are going to look closely at the car wash. And if a federal forensic accountant takes a close look at the car wash, Heisenberg's entire multi-million-dollar empire collapses like a house of cards over a random local business guy's unpaid taxes. One loose thread would unravel the whole tapestry. So she takes $600,000 of Walt's drug money and forces Ted to pay off his IRS debt to make the government go away. Walt completely loses his mind when he finds out. He goes down into the crawl space, screams and laughs like a manic supervillain because the money is gone. He treats her like a traitor. But Skyler wasn't being emotional or reckless. She was neutralizing a structural existential threat to their survival that Walt didn't even realize existed. She saw the board 5 moves ahead and took out the target before it became a disaster. Fast forward to the endgame in Season 5. Everything is completely imploding. Hank finally knows the truth, the DEA is closing in, and the walls are falling down. Walt comes rushing back to the house, frantic, screaming at everyone to pack their bags because they need to run and disappear. In that absolute chaos, Skyler grabs a knife from the kitchen and stands between Walt and her son, Flynn. It looks like pure hysterical madness on the surface, but look at what she actually accomplishes in that exact moment. By pulling that knife and escalating the situation, she forces Flynn to step in, protect her, and call 911. She creates an undeniable physical record in front of witnesses that she is terrified of her husband. In a single move, she legally detaches herself from Walt's impending downfall. She establishes her status as a victim, not a partner in crime. Then, Walt does something unforgivable. He kidnaps their baby daughter, Holly, and flees. A few hours later, he calls Skyler on the phone. He is screaming at her through the receiver, calling her a bitch, telling her she never respected him, and loudly taking 100% of the blame for everything that happened. And this is the moment that cements Skyler's genius. Mid-conversation, while she is crying and terrified for her missing baby, her brain doesn't shut down. She hears the tone of Walt's voice and instantly realizes exactly what he's doing. She knows the police are sitting right next to her tapping the phone line. She realizes Walt is putting on a theatrical performance for the feds to give her total legal immunity and absolute cover. She doesn't hesitate for a single second. She doesn't break character, she doesn't argue, and she doesn't ruin the play. She steps right into the script, cries on cue, begs for her baby, and says exactly what the feds need to hear to paint her as a hostage rather than a co-conspirator. It is the only time in the entire series where Walt and Skyler actually sync up perfectly as a team, and she caught onto his strategy instantly without a single word of warning. Because of that split-second play, the feds stop treating Skyler like a criminal mastermind and start treating her like a victim. That is the real, underlying tragedy of Breaking Bad. Walter and Skyler could have been an absolutely unstoppable power couple if Walt had just checked his massive ego and treated her as an equal partner from day one. Every single time Walt brought her a messy, catastrophic problem, she found a way to solve it or clean it up, but Walt's deep-seated insecurity wouldn't let him do that. Admitting Skyler was a genius would mean admitting that he wasn't the sole legendary mastermind of his own story. He needed to feel like the big, strong provider kingpin, so he lied to her, manipulated her, and dragged her through absolute hell while claiming he was doing it all for the family. And Skyler saw right through that lie too. In that final, heartbreaking meeting in the apartment, when Walt finally admits, "I did it for me. I liked it. I was good at it," Skyler doesn't look surprised. She just nods. She already knew. She had known for years. In the end, intelligence without wisdom is nothing but arrogance. Walter White had book smarts, but his pride made him incredibly stupid. He thought his brain made him completely untouchable, and it ended up destroying every single thing he touched. Skyler had the one thing Walt never developed: wisdom. She understood that real intelligence isn't about winning every single ego battle or being remembered as a legendary criminal kingpin. Real intelligence is about assessing reality clearly, protecting the people who matter, and doing whatever it takes to survive the storm. Walt wanted to die as a myth. Skyler just wanted her children to live, and when the smoke cleared, she was the one who actually achieved her goal. I hated her the first time I watched this show, honestly. I think most of us did. We fell for Walt's rationalizations because the show was a wild ride and we wanted to see Heisenberg win. But if you go back and watch Breaking Bad from the very beginning, knowing exactly how the tragedy ends, the truth is staring you right in the face. Skyler White wasn't the villain of the story. She was just the only actual adult in the room, desperately trying to protect her family from a monster. And that makes her the smartest character in the entire series. But hey, let me know what you think down in the comments. Am I totally reading this wrong? Or does this completely change how you view the show on a rewatch? Drop a like, hit subscribe for more deep dives, and I'll see you guys in the next one. I'm out.